Okay, good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us for the National Center for Rural Road Safety's December webinar entitled Local Road Safety Plan Implementation Part 1. My name is Jamie Sullivan, and I'm the director for the Safety Center. I'm going to get us started by going through the polls that we have over on the corner. So it looks like we have about 10% of you joining us from the Northeast, about 13% from the Southeast, about 23% from the Midwest, about 51% from the Western U.S., and 2% from other. We also have about 82% of you joining us by yourself. However, we do have several groups joining us today as well. We have about 12% of you in groups of 2 to 3 people, 6% in groups of 4 to 5 people. As always, I'll give you some instructions for how we can get the information for who's in your groups when we move over to our other screen. For which transportation groups that you're joining us from, today we have about 8% of you joining us from the Federal Transportation Departments, about 14% from state DOTs, about 31% from local transportation departments, about 4% from state highway safety offices, about 4% from public lands agencies, 8% from other federal, state, or local government agencies, about 10% from our LTAPs, and about 4% from universities, and about 16% from private consultants, and 2% other. And then most of you are joining us by computer only. There are a handful of you joining us both by computer and phone. I will remind you that in some cases, especially if you're joining us through the website and not through the application, you may experience some audio issues. If this is the case, we would ask you to please dial in on the phone. The phone number is in the top left-hand corner of your screen, and that should fix some of the audio issues that you may have. If you do have other technical difficulties, however, you may put those in the chat pod, and Dana, who is assisting us with today's webinar, will attempt to help you as well. So at this point, I'm going to move us over to our presentation. I do want to thank our co-host for today, the National LTAP and TTAP Association Safety Working Group, as well as Rosemarie Anderson and Hillary Eisbrands from FHWA. All three of those groups did a huge amount of work for today's webinar, both coming up with the topic that we're using, as well as making sure that we had speakers for today's webinar and the second part, which will be held in January. So I do want to, again, say thank you to the National LTAP and TTAP Association and FHWA for assistance with today's webinar. For webinar logistics, the duration will be about an hour and a half. As always, we are recording this webinar, and it will be archived on our website in about a week. For quality of the recording, all phone lines have been muted during the presentation with exception of our speakers. I will remind our speakers, please make sure that your phone lines are on mute while you're not speaking so we don't have any interference with the quality of the recording. If you are listening on the phone, I would ask you to also mute your computer speakers. Otherwise, you may hear some feedback as well. To maximize your screen and the presentation today, if you need to do that to see any of the figures or graphics, in the top right-hand corner of your screen, you'll see 4 arrows that press outward. That will make the PowerPoint itself larger and get rid of some of the extraneous information around the outside. At the end of each section, which we will have 4 of today, there will be time for question and answers. As always, you may put your questions into the chat pod on the left-hand side at any time. And when we do stop for those 4 question and answer periods, I will read those questions out to our presenters, but don't feel like you have to wait until we get there before typing in your questions. There's also a handout pod in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. You can find a PDF version of today's webinar slides for you to download if you'd like those. They will also be available on our website with the recording of this webinar as well. And lastly, we would ask that you please complete the follow-up surveys that we're going to send out. They're vital for us assessing the webinar quality. There will be two. There will be one that is following directly after today's webinar, and then there will be another one in a few months to figure out what actions you've taken since you've seen this webinar. On your screen right now, you'll see the survey link for the one that will go out directly following today's webinar. We do like to provide it here, as well as in that PDF handout, just in case it ends up in your junk mail, in your email. That is the only way that we can accept requests for CEUs and certificates of completion. If you fill out that survey, it takes about 2 weeks before we close the survey out, and will take about 4 to 6 weeks after that to provide certificates to CEUs. The CEU form needs to be returned to continuinged@montana.edu and not to the Safety Center. It is a different department at Montana State University who does that for us. You may also request a verification of completion form from Montana State University. In the top left on your screen right now, you'll see what the course registration form looks like that you'll be asked to fill out if you'd like CEUs. They are free for you. And in the bottom right-hand corner, you can also see what an example of a verification of completion form would look like. It would show you all of our webinars that you've taken and requested CEUs for, as well as either of our summits that you may have attended. Now I'd like to introduce you to our presenters for today. First up, we'll have Rosemarie Anderson. She is currently the Local and Rural Roads Manager in the Office of Safety at Federal Highway Administration. She has been with the agency for 10 years and oversees projects and programs with a focus on local, rural, and tribal road safety. Additional duties include human factors, work zone safety, and MUTCD. Before coming to FHWA, she was employed by the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission, where she managed the Safety and Security Planning Program. Rosemarie holds a bachelor's degree from the University of the West Indies in Jamaica and 2 master's degrees from the New Jersey Institute of Technology. Up second, we will have Victor Lund, who is a traffic engineer for St. Louis County, Minnesota, where he leads the traffic division. He received his Bachelor of Science degree in Civil Engineering from Michigan Technological University and his Master of Science degree with an emphasis in Transportation Engineering from Iowa State University. His background includes rural and urban highway safety, traffic signal design and operations, traffic signing and pavement markings, intersection design, and intelligent transportation systems. He serves as the chair of the Minnesota County Engineers Association Highway Safety Committee and is an active supporter in the Minnesota Towards Zero Deaths partnerships. Up third, we'll have Brian Keierleber. He has been the county engineer in Buchanan County, Iowa since 1993. He's a past president for the National Association of County Engineers, has served as the NACE State Director for Iowa, and has served on the Board of Advisors for the Civil and Environmental Engineering Departments at the University of Iowa. He is passionate about finding economical means for replacing the bridges in his county and has been aggressively improving the safety of the county roads and bridges. Safety solutions he has implemented include construction of a roundabout on the intersection of 2 county roads, safety edge on pavements, center rumbles, edge rumbles, and paved shoulders. He has received the Iowa County Engineer Achievement, the Iowa County Engineer Special Service Award, and the NACE Rural County Engineer of the Year Award, in addition to receiving numerous military paving and structures awards. He is a 1981 graduate of South Dakota State University with a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering. And last but certainly not least, we will have Dan Dovey. Dan oversees King County's High Collision Location Program from data analysis through determination and implementation of proposed solutions. He also has 22 years experience in traffic engineering design with expertise in work zone, traffic control, roundabouts, markings, and roadside safety. As a speaker, he has informed audiences on road safety topics, including mini roundabouts, high friction surface treatment, and barrier systems. Dan is a civil engineering graduate from Gonza University, a member of the American Society of Civil Engineers, and has performed as a professional civil engineer for 25 years. So as you guys can see, we have a lot of safety experience between our 4 presenters today, and I'm very excited to hear everything that they have to share with us. Our goal for today's webinar is that once you've completed the webinar, you will have an understanding of the Local Road Safety Plan Implementation Peer Exchange that was held in Bismarck, North Dakota. In addition, the webinar will showcase counties that have begun implementation of their LRSPs, and these counties will share how they've been implementing their plans locally by describing types of safety projects, funding opportunities, and strategies to streamline their safety projects. To achieve the webinar goal, we have 4 specific learning outcomes for you. The first is to identify some barriers that can affect the implementation of LRSPs. The second is to identify strategies to streamline safety project implementation. The third is to identify economical solutions for saving lives. And the last one is to list methodologies or processes towards the implementation. And at this point, I'd like to turn the webinar over to Rosemarie, who will get us started with talking about the peer exchange. So Rosemarie?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you are. I'm going to talk a little bit about some background in terms of local road safety plans, but additionally, I'm going to talk about some of what came out of the peer exchange that was held in Bismarck, North Dakota, back in May of this year. So I'm assuming that everybody on the phone already know what a local road safety plan is. But just in case you don't, I'll just refresh your memory in terms of local road safety plan. Local road safety plan is actually a proven safety countermeasure for that's federal highway. It's kind of encouraging folks to develop these plans. And it's really a tool for reducing roadway fatalities and serious injuries on local roads. And it basically looks at it in terms of the data. It's usually data-based. It's usually looking at it in terms of safety data, doing that data analysis and coming up with emphasis areas, countermeasures, and projects. So looking at it in terms of what should we be focusing on using that data that we have. And the plan should be viewed as a living document that can be updated and reflect any change in the data, because we're hoping once you start implementing your local road safety plan that the data will change. We will see improvement in your in safety on your roadways, and then we can look at it in terms of what are some of the next things that we're supposed to be focusing on. This is kind of a map that shows some of what's going on with local road safety plans, and this is not comprehensive by any means. But we're seeing where Federal Highway have a number of different projects going on in terms of local road safety plans. We're doing those pilot program in collaboration with NACE in a number of states, where we look at it in terms of not just the state, but in terms of a number of county roads being a part of that overall process. And we've seen where there's some states have actually, the state DOT have taken the bull by the horn and actually are developing or have developed local road safety plans for those states, as well as you have states and local agencies who are actually motivating local agencies to go ahead and develop their own safety plans as well. So this may be a little bit outdated. There'll be more dots on the line or more shaded areas on this map, but this is kind of give you an overall picture of what's happening in terms of local road safety plans. And then we talk about the benefits of those plans. The main benefit, or one of the main benefits before you do anything, is the local road safety plan enhances safety awareness among stakeholders. So what it does is basically bring those folks together, let them be more aware of what's happening on the roadways within their jurisdiction in terms of safety. Where are the fatalities happening? Where are the injuries happening? How are we going to alleviate that? It also gives you the forum in terms of leveraging funds from different stakeholders, not just from the engineering aspect, but when you start looking at it from enforcement, education, or public safety. How are we leveraging those funds to improve safety on the roadways? And it always should be looking at it in terms of complementing the strategic highway safety plan. One of the things that I always talk about is that if your issue is not in the state strategic highway safety plan, you will not be able to solicit funds, HSIP funds, to address your issues on your roadways. So one of the things you want to look at in terms of developing your local road safety plan is kind of make sure that it runs kind of parallel to what's happening in the Strategic Highway Safety Plan. And if it's not, if the issues are not in the Strategic Highway Safety Plan, this is an opportunity for you to identify those issues so that they can actually add it to the Strategic Highway Safety Plan once they start updating those plans. So we look at it in terms of collaboration and coordination among different stakeholders. We look at it in terms of informing where should we prioritize, where should our limited amount of funds be focused in terms of getting the biggest bang for our bucks in terms of safety. So one of the things here is that developing the plan itself does not actually lend itself to improving safety on the roadway. You have to implement those plans. And we've seen where implementing local road safety plans have had an effect in a few states around the country. And this is an example in Minnesota. Minnesota is one of the first counties that started developing county road safety plans for all their counties. And they've seen where there has been a marked improvement in fatalities and serious injuries on the county roads versus what is happening on the safety roads since the inception and implementation of local road safety plans. In Washington State, for instance, in Thurston County, they've seen where there are reductions in crashes on horizontal curves, overturned crashes, and angle crashes, 20%, 36%, and 13% respectively. They've seen where there has been those improvements. Once they've done the plan and focused their projects in the areas specified by the plan, they've seen where there has been improvement. Additionally, when they look at it in terms of the 5 years, 2008 to 2012 versus 2013 to 2017, where they have actually started implementing those plans, they've seen where there has been reduction in certain crashes as well. So we talk about developing the plans, and we're encouraging folks to develop these plans. But what the plan does is help you to focus your attention in terms of where the issues are and how you should actually go about doing them, given the funding. So we did a local road peer exchange, as I mentioned before, back in May. And what we were trying to achieve was to learn and share experiences on local road safety plan implementation. Looking at the plan, what are the state of practice? How are folks transitioning from the developing the plans to the implementation of those plans? What are some of the challenges and needs for that implementation and integrating local road safety plans into the overall transportation planning effort at not just the state, but also the regional level and the local level as well. We had 12 states participating, federal, state DOT, LTAP centers, and local agencies. And the format was presentations, work, roundtable discussion, and breakout sessions throughout the 2 days that we had the meeting. So some of the challenges that were identified were actually reducing crashes in rural locations was one of the major challenges, because what folks are finding is that these, in rural areas, the crashes aren't happening in hot spots. They're actually scattered, and it's hard to justify spending resources when there are no concentration of crashes within that area. Also, the volumes in rural areas are also lower, and this tends to have a significant impact in terms of convincing folks to spend money in those areas. The occurrence of only a few collisions can alter the data results significantly and misdirect resources. So basically, the challenge is, how do we comprehensively look at this in rural areas and channel the resources where it's actually needed, and that's been a challenge for a number of folks in rural areas. Additionally, we always come back to funding, and there's always limited or no funds. In some areas, the local agencies have to compete with the state projects for HSIP funds, which a lot of times it is lopsided because the local projects tend to be smaller projects oftentimes. The local matching funds, a lot of agencies are hard-pressed to find a local match for fund in terms of funding for projects. And the maintenance of safety projects after construction. So a lot of times we hear folks say, we can actually do the project, we can construct the project, but what about maintenance? How are we going to find funds to actually maintain what we are putting down on the ground, whether it's striping or signage or whatever the strategy is that we are being employed. And the relative cost of administering small projects. And that goes into also when we talk about project delivery, understanding the federal aid process. How do we understand that? What does it take, the time and effort that it takes to understand and actually administer that project? Is it worth is the effort worth the benefits that you're getting? And we talk about strategies not appropriate for conditions. We start talking about expertise. What are some of the expertise in terms of new safety techniques or strategies? And oftentimes we see at the local agencies where there's a lack of engineering staff. And politics always come into play. Local elected officials buy-in. How are we getting them to buy into the overall process? How are we getting them to buy into what we've done in terms of the planning process and assign funding to actually implement those plans? The public acceptance of strategies as well. We've heard where rumble strips have been a problem for a lot of folks in certain areas. For the bicycle community as one of them, for folks who live close to those rumble strips. The noise. The public agency staff shortages. A lot of times, a lot of these agencies don't have the staff to these. Then we have competing priorities. So at the local level, what is the priority? Do we clean the snow, or do we put striping down? Or do we improve our signage, or do we move the vegetation? So there is a number of issues, a number of challenges that are being faced that were identified at the peer exchange. Funding, some projects, in terms of funding, some projects have 100% federal share included. Roundabout pavement marking, shoulders, and centerline rumble strips. These are able to get 100%. They're eligible for 100% federal funding. Now we need to also look at other sources of funding. The funds, 402 funds, for instance, from NHTSA, or the Governor's Highway Safety Office, public health grants, and state and local funds. We may have to start looking at those in terms of targeting for projects. So often there's a separate state-led funding administration process. So a lot of times we talk about project delivery. In some states, what they're looking at is two different lines, one where the state for state projects and one for local projects. So we've seen where this has been beneficial in terms of implementing local road safety plans. Swapping federal funds for state funds in some states have actually started doing that, so that you're not going through the overall federal aid process to acquire these funds or administer these funds. We're seeing where there is also design-build projects, bundling of projects where you bundle projects across jurisdiction, where there, for instance, if you're doing signage and the jurisdiction, the county next to you is also doing signage, you bundle those projects, you get a better price. One agency may actually do the federal aid process, which is maybe less cumbersome for them, and the other mill may actually do some construction as well. So these are some of the issues, some of the things that came out of the peer exchange in terms of public delivery. So one of the things that we talked about was what you wish you knew before actually starting to develop the plan in terms of easing into implementation of that plan. And one of the major things that came out of it was actually communication, collaboration, and outreach. Just ensuring that all stakeholders are on the same page, getting all the stakeholders into the room in terms of developing the plan, but also continuing that communication throughout the process into implementation as well. Assign roles and responsibilities to the stakeholders. Get their vision early in the process. Let everyone, all the stakeholders, buy into that vision as well. And if the state is actually developing those local road safety plans, the county needs to be a part of that process. The county knows the county better than the state knows the county. So the county has to be a part of that process and let their voice be heard as well. And market the successes. Any success that you have throughout that process, you've got to market that process. Prioritize and focus in manageable portions, keeping realistic expectations. A lot of times we have a whole list of projects coming out of the local road safety plan. What are the priority projects? What are the projects that we can do now using our own resources instead of waiting until you get state funding or strategic highway safety? What can we do in terms of maintenance, for instance? A better understanding of the administrative process. Again, we talk about what is the administrative process in terms of whether it's a state application or you're going after HSIP funds, which are federal funds. Considering the timing of the local road safety plan development in relation to other safety plans. How are you getting what your issues are within your jurisdiction into the larger plans, the strategic highway safety regional plans, and getting those into the overall pipeline. The staff and elected officials turnover, that's been a challenge. We need to consider those. One of the things that a local road safety plan is that you have a document that when someone else comes in, they have it right there to look at as well. Know what are some of the challenges before you go in and address them along the way before you actually get to the process of implementation. So what are some key takeaways? Consider implementation and their challenges. Get your maintenance folks on board. That way you can implement some of what comes out of the plan through your maintenance process. What we've seen having maintenance folks on board is by the time the plan is completed, some of the projects have already been completed because the maintenance folks took the bull by the horn and actually went out and did some of those while they were actually doing maintenance. Process more application with project bundling. Look at it in terms of bundling. Coordination with your stakeholders. Be more active with your partners. Be intentional with marketing and outreach. Marketing safety is really, really important when we start looking at it in terms of local road safety plans. Make the process as simple as possible, less effective. It don't necessarily have to be complicated. Talk to your state DOT folks about the process. There's precedence in a number of instances in terms of how the process can be simplified. Incorporate a systemic approach because in a number of agencies, the fatalities and serious injuries are so scattered. Employing a systemic approach, but also educating folks on the systemic approach because a lot of times it's hard to justify making improvements in areas where there aren't any crashes. It's just a risk as well. A better understanding of the DOT challenges and improve evaluation of projects that have been completed. So these are some of the key takeaways that we had in terms of implementing local road safety plans. There's a lot more in the report, and the report can be found at this link on Federal Highway website as well. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Rosemarie. And at this point, we are going to direct you guys to the chat pod over in the left-hand side if you have any questions for Rosemarie. I am also going to move us over to our very first poll break. You'll notice that that chat pod still is on the left-hand side. Our first poll question for you is, which of the following can be a barrier that affects LRSP implementation? Reducing crashes in a rural location, limited or no funds, expertise, project delivery, politics, all of the above, none of the above, or I don't know, I don't remember. Also, we've started doing this for each of our webinars now at the Rural Safety Center. We'd like to provide a challenge to you, and again, we'll do this after each section of today's webinar. After listening to this particular section of the webinar, please write down if you'd like to share with us one action item that you think you can do based on what you just heard to improve rural road safety in your jurisdiction. So we'll give everyone a few minutes to go ahead and fill out those poll questions. And while we don't have a question yet, we do have a comment in the chat pod that says, love the bundling idea. I think there's a lot of potential here, especially in rural areas. And we will have one of our other presenters today as well. We'll be speaking about how well that's worked for them as well. So you hear a little bit more about that towards the end of today's meeting. Okay, and Rosemarie, it does look like at this point everyone's filled out your poll question. I've broadcast the results if you'd like to go ahead and address those.
It is all of the above. We talked about reducing crashes in rural areas, how some of those crashes are scattered all around, and limited funds is also correct. I see some folks actually said limited funds. Project delivery is also an issue for a number of states, where folks are actually competing with state projects as well. And politics also plays a part in terms of the challenges, in terms of having your leadership actually buy into the process so that they can actually assign funds to that, as well as limited resources in terms of human resources, in terms of getting, implementing the projects that comes out of the plans as well.
And while it looks like we don't have any questions for you yet, and we'll move on with the rest of the webinar, it does look like we had a lot of great action items that people put in. Some of them talked about improving the quality of gravel surfacing, promoting local road safety plans, swapping federal funds with state funds, encouraging the use of roundabouts, providing a simpler plan, interacting with people who've gone through the process before. So there's a lot of great action items in here. And we will post all of those as well to the website so that if you didn't have any ideas of how you may use the information from today, you can see what some of your colleagues have put in there. Okay, and following up, our first case study is going to be from Victor Lund of St. Louis County, Minnesota. So Victor?
Well, good afternoon. This is Vic Lund with St. Louis County, and thank you so much for inviting me to be part of the webinar today. We're located in the northeast corner of Minnesota, right on the west shore of Lake Superior. A couple of neat factoids about our county. We're the largest county geographically east of the Mississippi River. We as a county own and maintain approximately 3,000 miles, centerline miles of county roads, and it has about 600 bridges on those roads. Well, as I mentioned, I'm the traffic engineer for St. Louis County, and one of the things that I really appreciate about my job and that I enjoy doing is finding those new and innovative traffic safety strategies that are really able to cut down on our serious crashes, be effective, cost-effective, this kind of stuff. And just the other week, I was driving around and realized that I had a safety strategy deployed, and I'm being somewhat tongue-in-cheek here, but we had a safety strategy deployed without even me realizing it. We had a 22-inch snow event, and that created a nice little snow barrier. Let me get the tool here. The good news is the material costs are free. It does require some labor costs and equipment costs to deploy it. I guess my one question would be, what kind of mass test level would that be? Would that be a TL2, maybe a TL3? I don't know, maybe somebody can figure that out. But the good news, I don't think you need any end treatments on this stuff. But anyway, well, for the sake of my discussion today, I just want to focus on St. Louis County's experience with implementing our County Road Safety Plan, which is our version of the LRSP, the Local Road Safety Plan. And I'm going to assume that you have your LRSP on your shelf, you're developing it, you're about ready to publish it, something. You have a list of projects that might represent hundreds of projects. You might have millions of dollars worth of projects identified in total value. And so it almost looks like it's a sea of projects, and you're thinking, where do I start first? In other words, where do you make your first move? When we had our plan published in 2012, and we're actually going through a process right now to update our County Road Safety Plan. When we first had it off the printer, and we're thinking, okay, we need to start applying for some safety funds, and we have literally $10+ million of projects identified in our plan. What projects do I go after first? That's the question that I want to answer first here. And so my recommendation for you to think about is to consider starting with those safety projects, starting with safety projects that address the crash type that represents the largest percentage of the serious crashes on your system. And a couple key words there. So the crash type, not necessarily plural, but maybe singular, but that represents the largest percentage of your serious crashes. Those serious crashes, I would argue, is the yardstick of determining our success. So if you consider all crashes, you're probably going to be spending most of your traffic safety program working in the urban environment, whereas serious crashes typically are a rural phenomenon. I mean, yes, there are serious crashes in the urban environment, I get it, but at least in Minnesota, 80+% of our serious crashes are out in the rural highway system. And so that might be things like a roadway departure crash, such as a single vehicle run off the road, or a head-on crash, or it might be an intersection type crash type, such as a right angle crash. But think about what crash type represents your the largest percentage of your serious crashes. And this does a couple things. First, it gives you a great opportunity to see some early significant reductions in your serious crashes, because it's such, that's the largest volume. That's the elephant in the room. And so when you start seeing changes in that largest volume of your crash, or your largest crash type, you're probably going to see that needle start to move fairly early. But then to maintain that momentum as you start building your support for your traffic safety program, getting those early results that are positive really helps in bolstering and making the case to your elected officials, to your administration, to whoever, your residents, to get that support and really get that snowball effect going with your traffic safety program. And in St. Louis County, our example was that roadway departure crashes represented 54% of all of our serious crashes on our county road system. And most of those you can see are single vehicle run off the road crashes, and then some of those are head-on crashes. But one other thing I think is interesting from this chart is if you look at run off the road, head-on, and right angle crashes, that constitutes about 67%, or about 2/3 of all of our serious crashes on our county road system. Think about that. Only 3 crash types describe or represent the supermajority of our serious crash types. Kind of something interesting to think about. And it's probably similar for you, especially if you're in a rural environment. Well, once you've identified the crash type that you want to address first, I would then consider beginning with a low-cost proactive safety strategy suite. So think enhanced edge line or wide edge line versus shoulder widening. Think about chevron signs versus curb reconstruction. And this is low cost versus moderate to high cost. So I want you to be thinking hundreds of dollars per mile or thousands of dollars per mile, maybe hundreds of dollars per curve, hundreds of dollars or a couple of $1,000s per intersection, instead of tens of thousands of dollars per mile, tens of thousands of dollars per intersection, or $1 million per intersection or something. Start with those lower cost projects. First, it'll enable you to cast that wide net or create that shotgun effect. And just like Rosemarie had alluded to earlier about when she mentioned about systemic analysis, using that that method, our serious crashes in the rural environment tend to be very widely dispersed, almost with the appearance of a random distribution, although I would argue I think there's not, we can predict with risk factors on causality there. But cast that wide net to get yourself that best opportunity to proactively reduce those serious crashes or prevent those serious crashes from happening in the future. Work your way up the tree of safety strategies. And we always use this analogy in Minnesota about harvesting that low-hanging fruit. You know, I think about in my previous house, I had an apple tree in the front yard that was mature when we moved in. And I always enjoyed picking that fruit because in the fall time, it was just easy. You walk up, and when you're standing on the ground, you just grab the apples right off the bottom of the tree. But then you have to grab the ladder out of the garage, pull it out, put it up into the tree, and you have to start doing a little bit more work to get to those apples. And then the apples at the top of the tree, those are the most precarious ones, right? But work your way up that tree of safety strategies with those low-cost projects first, and then looking at those medium-cost projects, and then looking at those higher-cost projects later. And then bias your safety strategy selection, the types of strategies you want to employ, bias those to proven strategies. And when I think about that, the Federal Highway Administration has this great website resource. It's called Proven Safety Countermeasures. I've been using it personally for several years. And lots of great resources on there about strategies that are proven academically to be effective. And that gives you that great confidence to know that, hey, the projects we're putting out on the roadway system, we have high confidence that we're going to get a return on our investment. So when you put out a shoulder rumble strip, probably you're going to be expecting at least a 35% reduction in either all crashes or maybe a higher percentage for those serious crashes. That's probably what you're going to get because it's been proven that way, whether you try it in Minnesota, Florida, Wyoming, or wherever. Here's a couple pictures of some of the safety projects we've deployed in St. Louis County. The picture on the upper right-hand corner, that's simply just a 6-inch wide wet reflective edge line. You can kind of see from that picture, it's a little bit small, I understand, and I apologize for that, but it really makes that edge line pop. And notice the cross-section of that road, that it would take a full reconstruction project to put on paved shoulders on this roadway. There's no room for paved shoulders, and we don't have enough money to put paved shoulders out there. But by putting that low-cost 6-inch wide edge line, the evidence I understand and have read in different reports, 15%, 20% reduction in those single vehicle run-off the road crashes. My favorite picture is right in the bottom center. It's that curve. That's about 40 miles north of Duluth or something. That's my favorite picture because it has 3 different strategies in one. It's a curve, it's a high-risk curve, but there's chevron signs, proven safety strategy, edgeline rumble strips, proven safety strategy. We have a wide 6-inch wide edge line that's wet reflective, ground in. And so we have those 3 strategies employed into one curve. Obviously the rumble strips and the rumble strips and the striping continue on both sides of the curve, but at the point of the curve we have 3 things in that picture. Plus, actually we already had a paved shoulder. That's also a safety strategy there. On the center top, you can see a rumble stripe. That's a white edge line underneath a rumble strip. The rumble strip underneath the white edge line, I should say, rather. We've done a few of those. We've not been doing those as of late. There's a little bit of we had kind of a political issue running into those from a noise concern because the rumble strips are so close to the road or to the traveled way. But one positive benefit of that strategy, if you're able to use it, is you get both the auditory vibratory benefit of the rumble strip, but at nighttime when you have those wet conditions, you get that good wet retroreflectivity without using a wet reflective bead. Now, after you've gone through most of your system and most of your plan and deployed most of your low-cost safety strategies, for St. Louis County, this took 3, 4, 5 years for us to get to the point where we've deployed most of the strategies in our plan. But then I would recommend going back over, and I call it tightening the vise. And so now you're moving up that tree of safety strategies, and you're beginning to implement these higher cost, more intrusive projects. And so curve reconstruction, take this for an example. We had we deployed chevron signs at about 113 curves back in 2015, but then I have a high friction surface treatment project, 2 of them in 2020 next year, on, I think it's like 8 or 9 curves that we're going to be doing. But those are the high risk of the highest of the high risk curves that we're deploying that strategy on, because it's really it's costly. $80,000-$90,000 is what we're estimating for each of those curves. Intersection lighting, $15,000 per intersection. So we're doing it at the highest of the highest risk intersections. Innovative intersections like reduced conflict intersections, or we call them J-turns at a rural expressway intersection. So you're really coming back in the locations you've already treated with the lower cost safety projects and tightening the vise by saying for the highest of the high risk locations, now we're going to put in some more impactful type projects at those locations. And that's actually the phase that we're in St. Louis County right now. Funding considerations. All this requires funding, I get it, and it's always a challenge, and I get that too. These are the 4 sources that we use primarily in St. Louis County. We rely on HSIP. The thing I'd like to note there is in Minnesota, and we're very appreciative of this at the county level in Minnesota, that MnDOT shares HSIP funding 50-50 approximately between the DOT and the counties. And that's because MnDOT, to their credit, recognized early that about the fatalities are split pretty much 50-50 between the county road system and the state highway system in Minnesota. And well, if you're going to get to 0 deaths, you got to address both systems. We have our local county state aid funding, which is basically the gas tax and vehicle registrations. That's dispersed back to the counties. We have our local property sales, or local property tax rather, and then we have this local option transportation sales tax, 0.5%. And this may not necessarily be appropriate for all jurisdictions or all counties because it depends on how much sales you have, but in Duluth, because we're kind of a tourist thing, this generates about $13-14 million of dedicated funding for transportation projects in St. Louis County, so another great resource. Typically, we're using HSIP funding for about 90% of our projects, and then we're using 10% through the other 3 as our local match. Project bundling. Somebody made a comment about this, and we're actually pretty proud of this at St. Louis County. We've been doing project bundling, and I'm not trying to toot my own horn here, but just as a way of encouragement for folks out there. We've been doing project bundling for 15+ years in St. Louis County, especially on our striping projects. But basically what project bundling is this, is that you have a partnership between regional counties, regional agencies that want to do a similar project. And the most recent project bundling that we've done, for example, we did a project where we deployed a mainline dynamic warning system at 7 different intersections between 3 counties, neighboring counties to St. Louis County. And because we had the resources, we had the ability, we had the experience, we were the county that actually put the plan together. We were the construction administrator. We paid the contractor. We did all the inspection. We're doing the project closeouts. So you're finding that lead agency that can really develop the plan and administer the project. And your partner agencies can enter into a cooperative agreement with that lead agency to participate in their respective costs. So here's the benefits, twofold benefit. Number 1, economy of scale. Because you're increasing your the quantity in your plan, you're probably going to have a lower unit price. Secondly, you're opening the door for those agencies that have limited resources. What I mean by that is those counties or agencies that may never have done a project like this, now we're actually driving those safety projects that are needed onto the roads for those counties that may never have participated. So we're leveraging those counties that really have that experience and that expertise, and those other counties that are a little bit shy, they can kind of partner together and make it happen. Again, and with the economy of scale thing, again, you're actually, because of the lower unit prices, you're probably touching more locations than you would have if each county would have done it independently. Some results in Minnesota. I just updated this chart from actually just this fall here. But this is looking at the relationship between the fatality rate statewide on various systems to the preparation and the beginning of the deployment or implementation of the county road safety plans in Minnesota. You can see between 2012 and 2017 there was a 34% reduction in the fatality rate on the county road system statewide. And for that same period, the fatality rate on the trunk highway interstate system was approximately flat. That post-2012 is after the widespread deployment started in Minnesota of the County Road Safety Plan projects. Yeah, there was a tick up in 2018. Is that a trend going into the future? I don't know, but I hope it's not, and if it is, it'd be kind of disturbing, but we'll see if it's that anomaly or if it's if we return back to our trend. We'll hope that we return back to our trend. Two last slides here real quick. We have some great resources in Minnesota that we use for traffic safety and traffic sign maintenance and management, pedestrians, bicyclists, and then also safety strategies that local agencies can implement as policies. So there's sample policies in the blue book there. I would recommend, I mean, certainly you're welcome to go to this website here that's listed, but I would highly recommend that you, as your counties and your state, think about developing your custom handbooks and guidebooks that your counties and your state can utilize that's centric to applicable or best representative of your region. The counties in Minnesota, we use these all the time. They're great resources. They're above and beyond resources, think of it that way, from our safety plans. But they have really good practical information that you can use for deploying different safety strategies. In my last slide, when safety strategies crash, kind of a tagline there, I guess, but these are actual real images of newspaper clippings in St. Louis County from when we deployed our rumble stripe project, you know, the rumble strip underneath the edge line. And the reason I share this is for two reasons. Number one, it's possible and probably likely that in one of your safety projects you're going to run into a buzzsaw politically. Don't let it dissuade you from continuing. I mean, in fact, I was just in a meeting yesterday with my county engineer, and he brought up the example of this. This is 2010, you know, 9 years ago. He still remembers it like it was yesterday. So persevere. I like the word persevere. Just persevere when you encounter this stuff. But the second reason I bring this slide up is just be cognizant of the impacts of your strategies that you're deploying. You know, think about it from the lens of all the different users and the roadside residents. Of if I do this, what's going to happen to bicyclists, to trucks, to motorcycles, to residents living on the edge of the road? Not necessarily saying don't do it, but just it's almost like a measure twice, cut once kind of perspective. Well, that's all I have for today, and I really appreciate everybody's consideration, and have a great day.
Thank you very much. And at this point in time, we will take questions in the chat pod if you do have any. It looks like we do have one comment in here. Derek mentioned that he would add, too, that each county or agency could take a different portion of the work. For example, one agency could plan development, one could do the administration, and one could do bidding. So as we're waiting for some more of these questions to come in, I am going to move us over to the poll break real quick. And we have a couple of questions for the audience. The first one is, one way to streamline local road safety plan implementation is to cooperate with neighboring agencies to bundle projects. True or false? Or I don't know, I don't remember. The next one is, when beginning to implement your LRSP, it is recommended that you start with your highest priority crash type, the low-cost solutions, proven safety strategies, project bundling, all of the above, none of the above, or I don't know, I don't remember. And again, we would like to challenge you that if you do have some action items that you feel like you could take away after listening to Vic's portion of the webinar, we'd love to hear what those could be, what you could do to improve rural road safety in your jurisdiction based on what he spoke about. While we are waiting for everyone to fill out those poll questions, I will go back to the questions. Vic, our first one is from Hillary Eisbrands at FHWA Resource Center. She'd like to know if you can talk about how your county got to the point of using the 6-inch edge line instead of 4-inch. Some local agencies across the country struggle with justifying going to 6 inches.
Great question, and good to hear from you, Hillary. Here's how we do it in St. Louis County. We use 6-inch edge line on all of our capital projects on our state aid roads. Now, we recognize that we can't necessarily afford to do 6-inch wide edge line on all of our roads, but not necessarily all roads are created equal in terms of risk. And so we've taken this tiered approach where our state aid system, we always apply a 6-inch edge line with our capital projects. That's one other thing that we've done is incorporate these different safety strategies into our CIP projects. But so our higher class roads, we do a 6-inch wide as a standard. Our lower class roads that are obviously paved, we do a 4-inch edge line. But then for those lower class roads, some of those are still at risk, and so we depend on our county road safety plan to fill in the gaps or plug the holes for those local roads that are paved, obviously, but that are at risk for a roadway departure crash. And so those local roads that would have normally got a 4-inch, they'll still get a 6-inch because they're identified in the safety plan. But again, our higher class roads, we use those 6-inch edge lines. And really how I justified that with my county engineer and administration was, the proof is in the data kind of a thing where we're actually seeing reductions in serious crashes just by going from a 4-inch to a 6-inch edge line. And it really, I mean, if you look at it in terms of cost, you're not doubling your cost. I mean, yeah, you're 50% more, but from our experience, an extra maybe 10-20% cost difference between a 4-inch to a 6-inch edge line.
Okay, and at this point it does look like everyone has had a chance to fill out the poll questions, so I'm going to broadcast those results so you can talk through those real quick. Okay, the results are now broadcast, Vic, if you want to go through the answers for the poll question.
Oh, yes. Thank you for that reminder. Yeah, so the true-false question, great. Yeah, absolutely, it's true. Streamlining, I would argue this is one of the best strategies for streamlining your local road safety plan is cooperate with those local agencies or your regional agencies to bundle those projects. I can't think of any better way of doing that. And then also when beginning to implement your LRSP, it's recommended that you start with all the above. I see most people looked at that perspective. Yeah, your highest priority crash type, low-cost solutions, project bundling, all those things above. It's one of those things where it's like a stool. You really can't make it a stool stand unless you are addressing your high-priority crashes. You're using low-cost safety solutions. You're relying on proven strategies, and you're working with your partners to project bundle. It's kind of a four-legged stool there. So think about those 4 items when you're implementing your safety plan. So.
Perfect. And because we do have 2 more presenters left, and I want to make sure there's enough time for both to present, there are 2 more questions, maybe even a third coming in, Vic, in the chat pod. If you wouldn't mind, go ahead and responding to those while we move along to our next presenter. I would appreciate that if you just want to type in the answers right directly into the chat pod.
Very good.
Thank you. At this point, I am going to turn our presentation over to Brian so he can talk about economical solutions for saving lives. So Brian?
Good day, because it's good morning and good afternoon in different places. And I'm looking for the little device that can change the slide. A little bit about Buchanan County. I have 963 miles of roads, of which only 201 of it's paved. So the vast majority of my roads are rock roads. I have 259 bridges. I have 21,000 people and 372,000 pigs. In our crashes, we've had 10 fatalities in the last 10 years if you skip the last week of November, because I had a really bad month last week in November with 2 separate fatals in an area and types that I hadn't seen before. And we're running at the rate of about, prior to that, these accidents, we were running at the rate of 7 fatalities per 100 million vehicle miles traveled on our local system, while the state average is in the vicinity of 14 fatalities per 100 million vehicles miles traveled. Rosemarie kind of covered what a local road safety plan, but it's a document for proactive safety improvements. So I'll jump on there. Involve everyone in safety, because you can save lives, and that's kind of the whole point on this, that you can make a difference with what you're doing and see noticeable differences. And you also got to remove the emotions from the decision, because we've all been in this position where there's 100 different answers on what we should have been doing different, and yet we have to take that systemic approach and come up with solutions. This happens to be 2 rock roads together where this bus went off. We also have kind of an interesting and unique environment here too, because I've got a whole bunch of schools out there with clientele that walk to school or ride horses. There's no school buses that run, and that was really what got started. In this particular picture, we were in the process of paving the shoulders because otherwise when it'd get muddy, the kids would be walking on the road. Now, I have a 7-mile stretch with 5 schools and roughly 35 students in each school, so you've got 150 plus kids walking up and down the pavements in the morning. And in addition to that, on the rock roads, we've got a bunch of schools too. And they do present some unique situations, and this happens to be an auction day. And you notice the pedestrians with the buggy traffic and the vehicles and illegal parking and a whole lot of separate issues going on. And yes, the different cultures do present some different issues. In this case, the horses were moving the house and it couldn't quite make the radius, and they had to get more horsepower. Now, what I'd like to point out is some of the things that can happen in this area, and you'll notice there's 5 kids on that one little cart going to school. It did happen to us a year ago last spring where we had a buggy like this pull in front of a car, or vehicle doing 55. They all survived, but not without some major injuries. And so what we've done then to reduce this risk is we put a blister out there, or in essence almost like a driveway. So the horse going down the shoulder has to come out onto the blister and then cross the road at a 90, because the buggies don't have mirrors and they can't always see. And this way the driver has a better opportunity to look for vehicles behind them. The horses often get in the habit of following the same path, and when they get to the point, they return whether the traffic was coming or not. Buchanan County's local road safety plan has a lot of details, a lot of data in it, and we go through some of the statistics and such, and those are important as you're trying to develop your plan and how you're going to address things, as was pointed out earlier. And it kind of gives you an idea where to spend your money and where not to. Now, this happens to be where a side road coming in, and you can see that the Jersey-type barrier rail on the bridge pretty much blocks the vision of the bridge. What we did when we replaced that bridge is we went with an open barrier rail system. I don't have the greatest picture on that. I should have tried to get a better angle, but the visibility is much better now, and I don't have the complaints and concerns brought to me before. Then there's some things you just can't address, and this happened to be a combine with the header on it, and the teenagers driving the car, story has it they were playing games on their phones. At any rate, they plowed right into the combine header, and there's not a lot you're going to do with your road system to correct that. So younger drivers are a huge issue, and we've got to make sure that we start addressing some of the things and some of the ways they're doing that. And in our local road safety plan, there is processes on how to do that, and we can go through and address the different things, especially like the mock prom accidents and the goggles and such. Some of the most effective ones, in my opinion, is a graduated driver's license, because the statistics on 2 or more students that are not related in the same car and the accident rate just goes up dramatically. Same way with unpaved roads. Our local road safety plan gives us some comments and ways of improving the safety on the local roads. Also off your local road safety plans, you'll pick up some of the poor designs. And this is a prime example of where you got 2 pavements coming together at angles that are not 90, and visibility is a huge issue. So when you start going through this, one of the things that we do regularly is, as situations develop, if it's beyond what we really have the expertise in, go ahead and request a road safety audit. And I've been involved with a couple. We've got 2 scheduled for next spring. And develop a solution. This is some of the best practices, and this happens to be the Iowa manual, and I'll reference the Minnesota manual too a little bit. Some of the things coming out of that is speed. The national research indicates that the majority of drivers select a reasonable and safe maximum speed based on their perception of the roadway environment, and that the actual posted speed limit has little influence on the speed drivers choose. That kind of comes back into a lot of what we're doing, and I mentioned the Minnesota Sign Manual. I pulled some information out of that. So I like to say avoid your counterproductive signs. And there are signs that can actually do you more harm than good. And the prime example of that is putting pedestrian crosswalks up at uncontrolled intersections actually result in higher accidents rate, or crash rates, higher pedestrian accidents. The other thing is the deer crossing signs have proven to be ineffective at teaching the deer where to cross. In Minnesota, again, the 5 counties in Minnesota with 80% of the severe crashes were on curves with radius of 500 to 1,500 feet. Well, here in Iowa, our roads are a lot like they are in Minnesota, except in some cases Minnesota has trees. And so what I did is I went through and identified all of my curves and placed chevrons on all of them with the radiuses under 1,500 feet, and in some cases even a little bit above that. Bottom line is you can save lives by doing this. It's a simple thing to do, and it makes a difference. Advanced warning on the curves, again, makes a difference. And these are some of my older pictures, and we've made some major changes since then. What we started doing is we started putting reflective strips on them. I'll catch that in a bit. Flashing lights above the stop signs, and these details do make a difference. We started going with some with the solar-powered flashing lights too. Now that happens to be the same intersection, and I moved my flashing light to a different location onto a curve. But in this case, we've gone with the flashing LED stop signs there too. I mentioned the reflective strips. Dramatically pulls out the sign and the chevrons, the stop signs and the chevrons. We've done that with all the stop signs in the county and all the chevrons in the county where we've had the reflective strips. And it really is making a difference. I'm getting a tremendous amount of very positive feedback on it. Doubling up the stop signs, stop ahead signs on that. And you'll notice the extremely wide shoulders. We'll get into that a little bit, but that's up in my Amish community. And part of it is if they get too close, the Amish have concerns. They brought to our attention at times they actually get vehicles, the mirrors will hit their buggies. Doubling the stop signs, again, that helps. And solar-powered LED speed signs and LED speed feedback signs. It's a little bit of distance to that one, so it's a little harder to see in the picture, but you can see it's saying 26 miles an hour. Texting while driving is about 6 times more likely to cause a crash than driving intoxicated, the same as driving after 4 beers. The #1 distraction reported by teen driving, texting while driving. Well, what can we do about that? And that comes back to our widened shoulders, and in our case, we've done 34 miles of widened shoulders, and you'll notice in particular up in the Amish country, I've managed to do that. That's the northeast part. But also, when I'm coming back in, I inherited about 28 miles of old state highways a few years back, and we've addressed the shoulders on a bunch of that. Again, the widened shoulders and flattened slopes. 30 miles of paved shoulders. Now, what we're trying to do as we come in and rehab an existing pavement, we're trying to pave the shoulders at that. Some of the studies have shown that by putting a tight paved shoulder on our pavements, it actually extends the life out significantly of the pavement. And I've got 30 miles now. We've got about 9 miles to be let for this year. And here's an example of the 4-foot paved shoulder with the safety edge. So we're putting the safety edges on our pavements too. Notice this particular stretch has the rumble stripes in it. And we've gone more to the rumbles on the shoulders. We are catching a little bit more complaints, not so much adjacent residents as some of the motorists have trouble staying off the center line and rumble stripes. 8-foot paved shoulders with the safety edge on the asphalt here too. And again, this is up in the Amish communities why it's so wide. Evaluate and adapt the rumbles and the rumble stripes and the fog lines. And we've done various things, but we've been doing this for a while. And it is making a difference. It is. There's no question about it. I have very few complaints on it. I can only think of one area that I really had any, and it was just one individual. This is an example of the centerline rumbles. What we did in an effort to preserve the pavement better, we pulled them off and we split them so they're not sitting on the joint on our new pavements. Now, I've got an old concrete pavement where I wasn't too worried about the joints going bad, where I went ahead and ground center rumbles on that too. But then I didn't worry about pulling it off the joint. And the rumble strips at the stop. And here's my initial rumble stripe, and it was a very, very positive experience for us. Absolutely no complaints. We did this on some curves, and it's been very beneficial. We've come back in and retrofitted some of our older pavements and put tide paved shoulders on them also. And one of the studies that I'd read years ago was that putting a tide paved shoulder on a road like this will actually be similar to adding an inch of thickness to that pavement. Part of what prompted it is I was getting such heavy semi-loads on a bunch of these roads, I was trying to break my edges off. I can eliminate that problem by putting the tide paved shoulders on, and then I had the ability to put the shoulder rumble in. Here's another example of the rumble stripes, initial ones. Now, we saw earlier about the friction courses on curves, and I really wished I'd known about that technology earlier, because I came in on several curves and flattened them. But I did adapt that to a bridge that was right on the end, and it's been very effective for me. This is a little bit of research going on, but things are changing, and in this case, it's a small town, and we're trying to get the traffic to slow down, and they put the pavement markings on red. Now, that's not in the MUTCD, but this is part of a research project. It's extremely effective. Again, the safety edge on the concrete, and yet one of the best things we're doing in the county is the safety edge. Signage is the best, but this is very, very effective. We've also recently started doing some wayfinding signs because of the large Amish population and the tourists, and we've had situations where a 60-passenger bus went by an intersection, and when he started backing up to catch his intersection, he overturned. And there was the vast majority of the people on the bus spoke only Japanese. Overall crash reduction from the wider edge lines ranged from 17.5% in Kansas to 30.1% in Illinois. Now, in the previous presentation, you saw the wider edge lines. We've done that too. We've implemented that throughout the county, and we've gone with all 6-inch wide pavement markings. My system, I do have local roads, but why distinguish when I come in, the vast majority of them are what we would call federal aid or farm market routes. And so there's no real reason to distinguish whether I'm putting 4-inch or 6-inch. Now, what the feedback I'm getting is it makes the road feel narrower. Well, remember the initial comments about people drive a speed that they're comfortable at. So if the road feels narrower, they tend to drive slower. Destination lights. Now, I was not a big fan of it. I kind of balked every time my board members wanted me to put them up until I got to look into my local road safety plan and find them in there, and then started seeing that they do reduce your nighttime crashes at the intersection, and they use a 0.62 crash modification factor, a 38% crash reduction factor. So if they are beneficial, so then I'll go ahead and spend that money on it. When we get down to the point, then this happens to be the cost-benefit analysis for the roundabout that we built. The cost-benefit analysis said that for every dollar I spend on that roundabout, it'll save $14 to the traveling public. And that's, if you're getting that kind of a crash reduction, if that kind of benefit, it's hard not to do this. This is building the roundabout. Here we are basically surrounded by cornfields out in the middle of nowhere, but I was getting fatal accidents there. And now that the roundabout's completed, virtually no complaints after the people got used to it. Prior to that, it was extremely hot. I have to admit, I was not a fan of roundabouts until I'd heard several presentations by a representative from Federal Highway Administration about the benefits of roundabouts, now I'm completely sold on them. And they are friendly to everyone. You see the semi going through there? The farmers in the area have switched from using tractors and wagons to move the grain to semis. And it's a whole lot easier if you can go through a rolling situation than coming to a full stop. So it's been working real well. And yes, they are friendly to all users. You can see the Amish buggy going around the roundabout. The only real issue I've got is I've got some snow problems in there, and there are ways to design around that. I know a county in Colorado that's actually making a depression instead of a mound in the center and reduce that snow problem. From the perspective of safety, we have to look at things from a different perspective and try and come up with better ways of doing things. Now, if this is the view you get all day long, you will have a different view on safety and what's needed. Some ideas are going to take a while to be implemented. This is a picture coming out of Europe that I took a number of years ago where they put a tree about a third of the way out in your lane, and it will cause you to slow down when you come into town. But what we have to know is that the true reward comes in knowing that we saved lives in what we're doing. And this happens to be my crash map. Iowa does an outstanding job of reporting and documenting the fatal accidents and such. And you can see from 2003 to 2012, I had 21 fatal accidents on my road system. And that's about the time we got real serious about trying to make some changes. And my latest one was from 2009 to 2018, and it said I had 11 fatalities. So I've basically gone from 21 to 11, and that's also, if you noticed, as I pointed out at the beginning, the state average on the fatals was about 14 per 100 million miles on the county system, and I'm down about 7. Now those numbers will change because of the last week of November of this year, but it's still going in the right direction. The comment was made earlier about improving the gravel and the safety on the gravel. And I've been trying to do some work on, this happens to be a stretch of rock roads that's polymer treated. The friction's good on it, but my real fear is that as I improve the surface, I eliminate the dust, I get rid of a lot of the potholes and washboards, the people tend to drive faster. So will thin surfaces increase or decrease fatalities? That's a really good question. I wish I knew all the answers. I hope I'm not putting things in the wrong direction and start increasing the fatal accidents and severe crashes on the rock road system. And that completes my presentation, and I know they're waiting for questions at the end, so we'll charge forward from there.
Okay, and there are some questions over in the chat pod. I am going to skip the poll questions just to make sure that we can go to our next speaker. And I am going to ask you, Brian, if you wouldn't mind typing in the answers to the questions directly into the chat pod so that we can make sure we do have enough time for Dan to go ahead and give his presentation as well. If we have time, we'll circle back at the end.
Certainly.
So Dan, I am going to pass it along to you now just to make sure that you do have enough time to provide your presentation too.
Okay, thank you. Greetings everyone from the great part of Northwest Washington here. King County's seat is the city of Seattle, and our county is pretty diverse. We go from sea level up to 7,000 feet. The eastern portion of the county is part of the Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Forest, but we also have a lot of farmland, some river valleys, and a lot of topography that's very curvilinear and has hills and valleys you have to come through to get around. Our plan, the implementation of it actually makes a little more sense when you look at how we developed it in the first place. We engaged in several steps to determine where the locations would be that we would address with money and remedial measures to fix our crash problems. And that process very quickly running through this. We first, back in 2007, started using our geographic information system, which we've had since the 90s, and mapped every reported collision on the geographic map of the county. In this example here, each little red arrow is a single crash, and the arrow is indicating the direction of vehicle 1 in that crash. These are probably mostly single vehicle run-off-the-road collisions. This is a valley down into our farming area east of Seattle. So you can see what we did there. This data was available from that day going forward because we now have 12 years of crash data, all mapped geospatially, and this is the software we're currently using, ArcGIS version 10.3. In doing that, it gave us the ability to then look at that data, little tiny points across the entire map, and develop heat maps from that using point density analysis. Basically, light up in a certain color based on how many little points you see in a certain distance from each cell across the whole county in a raster image. The more crashes you have in a given proximity, the more it lights up from green to yellow to orange and to red. Every location in our intersections that lit up in yellow or orange, as well as our roadways, this is a rural valley, the Green River Valley in the lower right corner, and you can see just portions of that roadway system where there's some sharp curves, had more crashes than the rest of the roadway system there. We took those locations and calculated a crash rate based on those highlighted spots from the heat map. We added some traffic volume, which we count regularly and interpolate where needed to help develop those numbers. In the roadway crash rates, we have to also include the roadway lengths, and there I took the hotspot plus some additional lengths run out to help fully include the entire thing as a comparative measure between different crash rates across the county. And for our intersections, we get the crash rate already from every signal, all our roundabouts, all our two-way stops on the arterial network, and the vast number of our all-way stops. And in some cases, the heat maps even gave us some locations that were unmarked that were still having a crash problem, which was pretty fascinating. From that, we took the crash rates in two separate histograms and just plotted them on how they were coming in. Intersection crash rates are usually doing pretty good in the 0.3, 0.4, 0.5 crashes per million entering vehicles range. That's the top of what forms a bell curve or a normal distribution across this chart. Everything above about 0.9 or 1, we would consider a high collision location. In other words, even if you have a busy intersection but a lot of cars going through it, your rate may not be high. But some intersections that have a lot of crashes in proportion to their actual traveling public going through it could trigger really high. And in this case, you can see one up there at 2.7. That's way up there. And from that, we would then do a report. We'd also do a few other things. We'd look at the crash trend over 10 years. Is it getting worse? Is it getting better? Visit the site. Is there evidence of vehicle collisions that are relatively common, leaving debris, that kind of thing, tire rubs on curbs? We'd look for a crash pattern that could be addressed from an engineering solution. Sometimes distracted driving, medical conditions, DUI, of course. Those things aren't something we can treat directly, but could contribute as a factor in some of these collisions. And then I focused very highly on the crash reduction factor and the potential to actually fix a problem if we could identify it and calculate that into a benefit-cost ratio, just like Brian just showed you in that same calculation. And then we would report on it, and we would have 20, 25 intersections and probably as many road segments every 4 years when we do this report. And we supplement that every 2 years just to see if things have changed. So implementing this, our county went through a downturn in revenue a few years ago. And so our priority went from capacity to safety and preservation. And safety funds, of course, are very, very directly dedicated to high collision locations. We also have a guardrail program. We also have intersection improvement program separate from that. And we have our own sign shop. So doing low-level stuff like putting in warning signs and that kind of thing was something we'd already addressed years ago and continue to maintain directly through that shop we have. But here's some of the things we've done, and I can show each of these individually and talk about how they worked in the end, and a couple examples. Our mini roundabouts, one of the things that came out in our 2016 report was an intersection that had a two-way left turn lane, but nobody was using it to turn left. They were out in the mainline lanes getting into collisions. And if you look at this intersection in the upper right corner, there's a huge area to walk across just as a pedestrian to get between different lanes of travel. So we had a few pedestrian crashes as well. I designed a conceptual mini roundabout to fit inside that triangle. You can see that in the green and gray in the middle picture. And then we just put the finishing touches on this a few weeks ago. And here's a photo of it now that it's all marked and paved out and everything. And this has shown great promise in reducing speeds on the east-west road as well as fixing the intersection issues we were having. The crash reduction factor overall for roundabouts is 72%. I'm running some numbers right now, and our mini roundabouts are looking way higher than that even, and I'll get to that towards the end of our presentation. Benefit cost ratio for the expense on this one was still 4-to-1, which was very promising, and it had a lot of infrastructure improvement as well. We also have a single lane roundabout we identified in a location that really needs some rural, it's a rural area that needs some urban improvements. The reduction factor, again, is similar to the mini roundabout. For injuries, it's 88%, and In this location, we have a very heavy afternoon commute traffic going north-south through here, and we had a lot of left turns taking chances against that traffic just to get out. This roundabout's going to mitigate all that and still move the traffic very efficiently, but reduce all these concerns for crashes pretty significantly. And you'll see the other benefits we're going to realize as well is the opportunities for landscaping. It'll take care of what would have otherwise been a signal warrant, and reducing speeds on this corridor, which is posted 45, and there's a lot of people doing more than that even. So that's going to be a welcome benefit as well. HFST was something we embarked on because we had a chance to apply for HSIP grants, which was huge. And our local road safety plan, identifying these locations in our rural roadway system, was elemental in getting that applied for and granted from the state. HFST has an 80% reduction factor in crashes. And at intersections for rear-end collisions, it's about 50%. If people are distracted and don't apply the brake in the first place, they're not going to stop. But in both cases, we're able to see some promise from that. Here's an example of how it goes down and what it looks like when it's done. We spent $3.2 million and fixed 24 sites in our first round of this. Some of that involves pavement prep. You can't put it on old substrate. If the pavement's starting to fail, it's no good for HFST. You got to redo it, at least overlay it, if not restore the entire subgrade up. And the benefit cost ratio on this in most locations was well above 10, 12 to 1, up to like 20, 30 to 1. We're looking at $30 a square foot for, $30 a square yard for installation, plus traffic control and mobilization. But that's a very competitive price, and we were estimating far worse than that in the past. But we put in so much of this and gotten a couple of really good contractors that could do a nice machine-installed application of it that got that cost down. And I think that also helped show how promising this really was. We had one location that it was developed by a developer for a local subdivision and a school, and when they put in the new intersection, they didn't realize they had cut off the area they didn't have any right-of-way and made it blind to the oncoming traffic. This jumped out of our heat map again in orange and red color, that we had a sight distance issue. And all the crashes here, you can see all the arrows on the upper left portion of the center of the intersection. They're all southbound, getting hit by people going east-west, and just couldn't see them coming and pulled out right in front of them. So this is a relatively promising fix. The benefit cost ratio of 14 to 1 is incredible. We also had 3 roadways where we had some intersections and the roadway itself was identifying a crash problem. In the left example here, you can see a 4-lane roadway, and we know that turn movements to the left are very tough in 4-lane roads because someone's coming through at high speed and all of a sudden someone stops to go left and they can get rear-ended or just clipped from oncoming. We restriped that to 3 lanes with bike lanes. The reduction factor for this type of fix is about 50%, 47 on here. $190,000 was spent to fix 3 roadways, not just 1. That was our total cost. And the benefit cost, again, is a really good number, 15 to 1 on this as well. So in this location and 2 others, we've seen a really big improvement in terms of safety just from making those lanes reassigned. And we didn't have the traffic volume that needed the 4 lanes. That's key to this. If you have a traffic volume issue, this may not work for you. You may need widening instead. But for this, it was a great application. We've done it elsewhere, too, and seen the same kind of results. Signs and markings, we had a few locations we identified that were missing a stop bar or missing stop ahead signs, that kind of thing. Those all went in. Cross traffic does not stop. This sign, for us, works really well in our, we have a plateau, which is all farming community, and every intersection between the state highways and our county roads has different types of control and different directions. North-south may stop in one location and east-west may stop in another. And drivers get through there and realize it all kind of looks the same to them, and they forget which intersection has which control for what. So the additional notification for them says, you have to stop, the through traffic doesn't, and that's made some difference in bringing crashes down. These transverse stop bars you see on here that are applied to the pavement for advance notice of stop, we put that in one location, and as of this last month, I'm still seeing a crash problem there, but I think it's more a failure to yield and see a proper gap than realizing you have a stop in front of you. So we've changed the dynamic. We haven't really improved the safety of the intersection just yet. We're still looking at that. And here you have some benefit cost ratios because signs are cheap. For low cost, pretty good benefit, a pretty good reduction in crashes as well. Some of our signals, we had like 2 side streets approaching an arterial. We have a left turn problem, and we identified that as having a potential to go in a permissive phase and notified them with the flashing yellow arrow to say you can turn if you have clearance and can get a gap. The crash reduction factor for this is nearly 100% for left turns, 15% overall for the crashes at the signal. And the cost for 3 locations where we did this was about $90K with a good benefit cost again. which worked really well. And most importantly for your local road safety plan, once you're all done with this process, look at how you did. Look at the numbers and see if the crashes are coming down and by what margin, and see if you can duplicate the crash reduction factors that are reported in the federal clearinghouse. We did rumble strips back in 2014. It was identified in a previous high collision location report. And the crash reduction factor for rumble strips is typically 30%. I checked a couple roadways we had done, mostly major arterials, and we had a 30 to 42% reduction from one roadway to the next in that range. The same roadway further down where we had more driveways and businesses and other congestion in the area, we didn't apply the rumble strips because there wasn't room to do it. Those untreated areas actually had an increase in crashes of 17%. So we reversed the dynamic in one direction and helped prevent an increase in crashes in the other at the same time. Mini roundabouts, as I mentioned earlier, these two went in 2006. This is in our, this is south of Seattle. And they have yet to have a crash in 13 years. Prior to that, we had 9 crashes in 5 years. So we have a 100% crash reduction from 2 mini roundabouts that have been on the ground ever since. And we now have another 4 on the ground that have gone in, and we're seeing some good results there. In one case, we disrupted a local driving culture that was very high speed through a very small valley. And with the new roundabout in place, we had several run-off-the-road crashes diverting off of the raised islands into the side corners and some fencing and a pole and that. That's all gone away after the first month it opened. In the last 8 months, it hasn't had another crash since. But we did let people know you've got to come through here and negotiate these curves to get through this intersection control device safely and not run off the road. And since then, it's proven very effective. We actually stopped a very unsafe culture just by the installation of the roundabout. And then last of all, HFST. We've had this on the ground now for 2.5 years for one set, another set for about a year, a little over a year now. I looked at the numbers briefly just because I was really curious to see how good we were doing. And we've had, in our 43 roadway locations that have HFST, they're all rural, relatively high speed, 35, 40 mile an hour curves. The radiuses go down as low as 150 to 200, 300 feet, and as high as 600, 700 feet in radius. So really tight corners, tight curves. Our reduction effectively is 76%. The actual national clearinghouse reduction is 80, so we're right in the ballpark of that. One thing I'll caution you if you use this treatment is we've noticed a number of motorcycle crashes resulting from this, which kind of has us puzzled a little bit, but I think you've changed the friction factor of the roadway itself. And since motorcycles lean and hold that friction very well to turn, we've affected their behavior a little bit in terms of just changing how the road itself performs for them. So that's something to be aware of, and just watch those and see what's happening there. I'd love to see more reporting on that from other agencies as well, if anyone has that. So that's basically all I have. Thank you, everyone, for your attention, and thanks, Jamie, for including us in your presentation today. It's been great to share our experience over here in northwestern Washington. And if anyone needs a Christmas tree, we've got plenty over here, so just let us know.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your presentation as well. And because we are a bit over our time, I am once again, unfortunately, going to skip over the question and answer period. I'm going to finish up. My very last slide, however, will have contact information for all 4 speakers in case you do have any additional questions that you'd like to follow up with them on. And before people do start also jumping off the call, I do want to bring up that we will be having a second part to this local road safety plan session in January, and I'll go over that in one more slide. So in today's webinar, we hope you've learned to identify some barriers that can affect the implementation of LRSPs, to identify strategies to streamline safety project implementation, to identify economical solutions for saving lives, and to list methodologies or processes towards implementation. Again, that webinar that I was mentioning, part 2, will be happening on January 23rd. It is the Thursday after TRB is completed. It will be from 11 to 12:30 p.m. Mountain Time. Registration for that will open within the next couple of weeks. As always, we do post all of our archived webinars to our website. This one will be available within the week. Please follow us on social media so you can get up-to-date information. We are planning to have a 3rd Rural Safety Summit, and we will be posting that information shortly on our social media, so please follow us there on Facebook and LinkedIn. And lastly, I now on the screen have posted the email addresses for all 4 of our presenters. If you do have additional questions that they did not answer today during their presentations, please feel free to email them or contact us at the Rural Road Safety Help Desk, and we can put you in touch with them as well. I do want to thank one more time the National LTAP and TTAP Association for helping us put this together and co-hosting, as well as Rosemarie Anderson and Hillary Eisbrands for putting together our speakers for us today. And thank you to Rosemarie, Vic, Brian, and Dan for presenting. You guys all shared a lot of great stuff today, and we do appreciate you taking the time to do that. So thank you, everyone, and have a great afternoon.